So, sorry. So he said that Laertes is rather probably a man of action, not a man of thought, and he goes immediately to take action. And later we will discover that, but in scene 3, in this conversation with his sister, we see that the tips is given Ophelia are about, of course, unromantic. They are not romantic. He believes that this is false love. Of course, the language used here is probably a little bit difficult, but you have to use some of the glossaries used for this play. So, in other words, in the beginning, very beginning, he tells her that you do not have to believe in an early love, because this cannot be true love, and hold it a fashion and a toy in blood. Speaking about Hamlet's love for her, he believes that it is a fashion. Of course, you can we don't say this today, but you can understand what it means. It means that it's just, I mean, temporary. It's not really permanent. It's just a whim for Hamlet, he believes, and a toy in blood, which means it's going to change very very soon. Violet in the youth and primary nature, sorry, or primary nature, which means, of course, an early love, and it's not an immature love. It's not going to be full, and it's not going to be complete, and it's not going to last. The perfume and suppliance of a minute, he says. So he elaborates here about the same idea. So we can say he is rather a more realistic person rather than a romantic person, and that's when I believe that Ophelia is different. Of course, she is rather more romantic, and in this interaction again, you start to draw the portrait of the two characters. You see, on the one hand, we said Laertes is not romantic, is materialistic probably, and he is a man of action. But also, you can say the opposite about Ophelia. But in addition to saying the opposite about Ophelia, we don't forget that Ophelia is a lady. And here the lady is passive, is receptive, is listening to a man who is giving her advice, and also the stereotype of the woman being romantic, the idea that women are more romantic than men, and the idea that women are weaker than men, etc. So we see here this is about the tradition and about the culture of that age. And this is confirmed in this scene, and also in the interaction between Polonius and Ophelia also. Uh, he was also speaking, Laertes was also speaking about Hamlet as a ruler and of royal blood, and he would not. So, speaking here about the social differences between Ophelia and Hamlet, and for him, for Laertes, being realistic means that means to believe that Hamlet would never marry Ophelia. This is what he's saying, I mean, literally speaking to his sister here. So he tells her, "Be wary then," which means beware, be careful. Best safety lies in fear. Best safety lies in fear, and I want you to underline that this is one of the maxims or one of the aphorisms that we have in this play. By the way, I told you that in this play we have a lot of quoted sayings, let's say, or maxims. What's a maxim? A maxim or aphorism, or an aphorism, or an aphorism, which means a short statement, a short sentence, usually that expresses a kind of general wisdom, or general truth, or general wisdom by philosophers, by thinkers, etc. And in this play, and in many Shakespearean plays, actually, there are a lot of maxims. Some of them became very popular in the English culture, and like here, for example, best safety lies in fear. But also, many of them are expressed by Polonius yeah, later in this same scene, but also in other scenes. By the end, he tells her not to forget his advice, but also she tells him something very interesting, because Laertes, of course, is leaving now. He's going to leave the country and is going to France. And France, the funny thing about France in this play is that it is supposed to be a country of entertainment, of probably vices. And so there is a kind of fear by Polonius mainly that his son, when he's going to go to France, probably he would engage in vice. He would he would engage in immoral practices, activities, associating that with France, with going to France. Well, and by the way, of course, you know that later he sends a spy to keep tabs on his son in order not to actually go astray. So she tells him also, Ophelia here, by the end of this dialogue between both, she tells him, do not as some ungracious pastors do. This is very funny, and it's a stereotype of some religious pastors, religious church people, churchmen, who sometimes, this is what she says, who sometimes, of course, those pastors, they teach you about morality, about how to behave correctly, etc. They teach you, but at the same time, they themselves behave immorally, and they do not follow their own advice. So this is what she told him, don't behave like that. Don't tell me do and do and do and that, do this and that, etc. And then you do the opposite thing. And then, of course, we have after that the discussion or the dialogue between Laertes and his father now. By the way, I have a picture of the father here, of Polonius, an illustration. Well, I think it's not very clear. This is Polonius. As I told you, Polonius is one of the interesting characters of the play. But there are also some opposition between critics about him in the appreciation of this character, in the assessment of this character. The opposition is between people who say this is a wise man, a wise old man who actually who is actually so educated and so wise and as a sage. He's playing the role of the sage, and I believe this is something justified in his statements. Some other critics who consider him to be a hypocrite, and in addition to being a hypocrite, to be an artificial character, who is, of course, learning just etiquette by heart, and who is behaving like not spontaneously. He's being artificial in his behavior, hypocrite. So there are different interpretations of his character, at least. But both are valid when you read what he says. Here, of course, before his discussion with Laertes, there is a kind of, as you could see, he speaks to Ophelia and he tries to get the information from her about the conversation that took place between his two children. He wants to know, and we see here that we could speak about the overprotective father. The overprotective father, he tries to protect his daughter, but also he tries to protect his son. I told you he sends a spy, etc. after Laertes, but also he's going to try to protect his daughter. He's going to tell her not to be careful of Hamlet and not to see him anymore, etc. So we could say I told her that the scene is mainly about filial bonds, about the relationship between father and son, father and daughter, and the relationship inside the family. By the way, the setting itself is revealing. Of course, the setting is a room in the house of Polonius. It's inside the house, and also between the walls, like we say. And of course, it's about how he behaves with his son and how he behaves with his daughter. So it's about family relationships and the overprotective father who tries to protect his children and who's so afraid about that, who's so concerned with that. And the best part, I believe, this is a personal preference. The best part, of course, is when he speaks to Polonius, and before the departure of Polonius, of course, he tells him, uh, "Give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought his act." Now, I think these maxims, again, they are maxims, M-A-X-I-M, which means, as I said, short sentences that express a kind of intelligence, a kind of wisdom. So, give thy thoughts no tongue, So give thy thoughts no tongue nor any unproportioned thought his act. Don't speak too much. Try and also don't move to action before you think twice. Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. When you go to France, be familiar with people. Don't be rude to people, but also don't be vulgar. By no means vulgar. Don't be too familiar. So here in these maxims and these tips, we see that he's always advising his son to be in the middle, to be moderate in his behavior. Don't go to the extreme on the right or to the other extreme on the left. Those sorry, those friends thou hast and their adoption tried, if you have friends that you tried and that you tested, then keep them, grapple them unto thy soul with hoops of steel, but do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new hatched unfledged comrade, but do not befriend people very quickly, and do not trust people very quickly as friends. Beware of entrance to a quarrel. When you got to a dispute, to a fight probably, beware of interest. Don't go to a fight very easily. This is a very important tip also. Don't go to fight very easily, but but once you are in the fight, do your best. Bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve their judgment. So it's all about talking, not to abstaining from talking too much and listening more to people. Costly. Also, there is also another tip, another piece of advice about how to behave with money. Costly by habit as thy purse can buy. So you don't have to spend more than you could afford actually, but not expressed in fancy, rich, not gaudy. Be rich, not gaudy, not extravagant. Do not actually show off with your expenditures, etc. So I believe this is very interesting, and you have to go through it again and again. And then, of course, we have Laertes who leaves, and uh, as we said, uh, to recapitulate the scene and the importance and the significance of this scene. It's about filial bonds. It's about we still have a lot of things to say about it. Of course, we you have to go through the different details and try to analyze. I'm sure you can have your own interpretation, your own comments on each detail about how he speaks to his son and to his daughter and how they respond also. But in general, to make a recapitulation, we have, of course, a kind of triangle in this scene: two men and one lady, and you can also speak about gender roles in this scene and family relationships. It's like, of course, a hierarchy that is built in this scene. And but at the bottom of the hierarchy, of course, you have the woman. But then you have Laertes, but you have somebody who is superior to Laertes, and one is advising the other. So of course we have the patriarch. Of course, as I showed you in the picture, that's the real picture of the patriarch. Look at the picture, and you see, of course, that rod in his hand, or that staff. By the way, the cane that he holds there. Uh, he is a patriarch. He's overprotective. He's so concerned with the behavior of his children, and he has a cane in his hand. By the way, that's of course in psychoanalysis. It also connotes uh, power and authority. You know that many kings used to have a cane in their hands, but you may think maybe they need the cane because they have problems with walking. No, not always. A lot of kings and a lot of rulers, they choose to have a cane or rod or staff without, of course, needing it for walking. But it's symbolic. It's a symbol of authority. It's a symbol mainly of male authority, of patriarchal authority. And so that's of course, the full description of Polonius. He is a patriarch, He is a man of authority, and you can see how Laertes is supposed to be a rebellious character. And he's not really a man of order. He's not, and he's a man of action. He's a strong man physically, and he's a fighter. But look at how he behaves in front of his father, with total obedience and politeness. And so you have to analyze all these details in the relationship between the different characters. And they reveal to you about, of course, the family relations, but also these relations could also give you an idea about how the society, the whole society itself, is structured. Because we may wonder, for example, in the very beginning, for example, when before Hamlet discovers that his father, for example, was killed, etc. Why didn't Hamlet, for example, contest the authority of his uncle, the new king? There is also the matter of the age, a matter of respect to the elderly, but also you have the position of the woman, which is a very weak position. So those people who have a very negative view about Polonius, by the way, of course, you can engage in a different process here, trying to draw a positive picture about Polonius. This is what happened with many critics, but on the other hand, you can also draw a very negative picture about Polonius, also, and this happened with many critics. And for the negative picture, for example, the issue of how he's protecting Ophelia, some critics say that he is trying to protect his own reputation against, of course, what people would say about this kind of relationship, because they, Laertes, as we said, believes that Hamlet would never marry Ophelia, but that would only result in smearing the reputation of the family. This is what actually people say Polonius is thinking about. So, as I said, in this scene, we are discovering the different characters. We are trying to draw like a kind of picture in which we have the different actors and the different characters inside the play, and we start as we move on and as we discover more and more in a gradual pace. We start drawing the different characters and the different personalities of these characters, how they behave and what they think, and etc. And from what kind of culture they come, etc. Then, of course, this scene 3 is going to prepare the floor for, of course, in order for us to understand why Polonius is going to behave in a certain way later. So we will go back after we move to more acts and more scenes. Of course, we will have to go back to this scene in order to remember certain things about Polonius mainly, and also about Laertes. After this scene, of course, we move to scene 3, and scene 3 is also another important moment of the play, when now we will have the encounter between Hamlet and the ghost this time, and we will understand what the ghost wants from uh, scene 4 and 5. I mean, scene 4 and 5, and we will have, of course, the first encounter between Hamlet and the ghost, and a beginning of the crisis now. The beginning of the crisis, because the real crisis is not the fact that Claudius became king instead of Hamlet himself, because Hamlet did not really. By the way, let me finish with this idea. This is very interesting. Is that the real crisis and the real problem that Hamlet is thinking about is not that the fact that he did not become king, because he was, of course, he was the crown prince. Like, the crown prince means the prince that who's going to be king after the death of the king. So that was not really his main concern. It's obvious, of course, in the conversations that take place, and in the soliloquies, etc. It's obvious that Hamlet is not really concerned about being king at all, which is not. I think I believe that in our contemporary mindset, it's something not normal. Normally, he should think mainly about being king and why he's not a king now and why the crown was taken by his uncle. But that was not his main concern. And this confirms again that Hamlet is a man of thought and not a man of action. His main concern, as you know, was about the murder of the father and taking revenge. That was his main concern. And we will start discovering this with scene 4 and scene 5 when he meets the ghost. Okay? And that will be an introduction to how Hamlet is going to behave with the ghost and how Hamlet is going to take that issue of the ghost. And now, as I said, the beginning of the crisis uh, is with these two scenes. The beginning of the crisis that Hamlet is suffering from, and that would lead to procrastination, and that would lead to a kind of existential question that is manifest mainly in the to be or not to be soliloquy, when it becomes a matter of life or death for Hamlet after that. This is how, of course, a simple, let me conclude with this idea, this is how a simple uh, incident of daily life, like, of course, we're speaking about limited characters in time and space and who are dealing with a certain issue, murder, revenge, etc., and how it takes us to broad existential questions, philosophical questions that are universal and that could be relevant in all contexts. So, I mean, this is how Hamlet, which is a play from the early 17th century, is very relevant today. That's what makes, of course, the play relevant at all times, and when, of course, themes, of course, develop from being limited, from being contextual to becoming universal, from being, of course, related to a certain context to becoming philosophical about human existence in general. And this is the case, I believe, with Hamlet, with the play Hamlet. So I think I need to stop now. Thank you very much for your attention, and please read more. Read the play again and again. Read it, but also in addition to the play, you can read, of course, more material. If you need more material on the play, I can, of course, provide you with that. But also, you have to read in general during this period, whether you read something related to our subjects or you read something else also in addition to that. So please read. Reading is the most important activity that would make you actually achieve success, I believe. Thank you very much and see you in the next lecture.